Richard Rawlings stood in that courtroom on a cool September morning, still wearing that confident smirk people knew from Fast and Loud. But as the judge read the sentence, something changed. His knees buckled. The man who built a kingdom flipping Mustangs and bragging about million-dollar deals collapsed right there, clutching the rail as cameras clicked. It turned out the king of cars had built his empire on something darker, and the truth was ugly enough to silence a packed courtroom. People watched as security moved in, and Rawlings was led away, eyes down. This was the day America's most trusted car guy became its most wanted. But how did Richard Rawlings fall from hero to handcuffs? That Dallas sun was already hot when Richard Rawlings walked into an old garage on a quiet street, looking at dusty car frames and cracked windshields like they were gold waiting to be dug up. This was the beginning of what would become Gas Monkey Garage. If you ever watched Fast and Loud, you probably remember Rawlings leaning over engines with that easy confidence, calling deals on the phone while his team scrambled to finish builds. You could say it was the American dream in motion, filmed in high definition with rock music rolling in the background. Richard, born in 1969, had started flipping cars long before TV crews followed him around, and he claimed to have sold thousands of them, enough to open a bar, a restaurant, and later a live music venue, building a mini empire that smelled like motor oil and barbecue. Fast and Loud launched in 2012, and for 8 years, it pulled in viewers who wanted to see rust buckets turned into six-figure auctions, with Richard shaking hands, lighting cigars, and speeding off in something loud enough to wake the block. At its peak, Fast and Loud was one of Discovery Channel's most watched automotive shows, bringing in millions of viewers per episode and making Richard a household name for people who didn't even care much about cars but loved the feeling of a win. Richard played the part perfectly, wearing flashy shirts, rolling into meetings in classic Mustangs, and calling himself the king of cars with a grin that suggested he could get away with it. And in many ways, he did. Gas Monkey Garage expanded. Richard's Instagram filled with jet photos and crowds cheering for him at car shows, and businesses carrying the Gas Monkey name popped up in multiple locations, selling everything from merch to beer. He partnered with Dodge, appeared at SEMA, and made himself the face of the modern American car-flipping hustle. He built an identity that said, if you work hard and move fast, you can live like this, too. Richard made the life of flipping cars and drinking beer look glamorous, even as his team worked brutal hours behind the scenes, racing against deadlines that the show often left out. But did you really know Richard Rawlings? You saw him high-fiving his crew, closing last-minute deals and throwing parties in the shop, but the reality behind that TV persona was far less shiny. The slash gear breakdown of his post-show life reveals how Richard's empire faced tough times after Fast and Loud ended in 2020. Gas Monkey Bar and Grill closed. The energy around the brand slowed down, and fans noticed Richard shifting focus in the garage to new ventures that didn't always land cleanly. He launched a YouTube channel, tried to keep the brand alive, and worked on car projects that didn't have the same high-stakes energy the TV show captured. Richard was still around, still flipping and talking big, but the noise of Fast and Loud was gone, and with it, the protective glow that kept criticism away. People started asking questions about how much of Fast and Loud was real, how deals were made, and whether the cars built under pressure for camera deadlines were as solid as they looked under the studio lights. Whispers about unpaid bills and tough business calls started appearing in forums. Richard's image as the unstoppable king of cars began to show cracks. And that brings us back to the rumor that exploded across late-night TikToks and YouTube shorts, claiming Richard had been sentenced for a Mustang scandal, a story that never happened but felt believable because the line between his confident TV persona and the challenges behind the brand blurred over time. You see, Richard Rawlings sold the dream of turning rust into gold. However, the reality of business in the car world is far more complicated, filled with harsh numbers, tax bills, and legal paperwork that don't make for good TV. But how did America's most trusted car guy become its most wanted in the eyes of the internet? The truth is, the cracks in this perfect facade started with something as simple as a tax audit, and what that audit uncovered would lead to questions no camera crew could edit away. The cracks in this perfect facade started with something as simple as a tax audit. In the spring of 2023, an IRS agent opened a folder with Richard Rawlings' name on it, expecting another routine check of a high-profile entrepreneur's books. Rawlings, the face everyone knew from Fast and Loud, had built a public image of constant wins, big flips, and parties with crowds screaming for Gas Monkey Garage. But the numbers did not match the lifestyle. An expense line for restoration parts looked too clean, and the paperwork on a custom Mustang sale held something odd in the VIN. At first, it looked like a typo. One letter off, maybe a number reversed. But when the investigator checked the VIN against federal databases, the record bounced back, and the system flagged it as non-existent. This was not just a wrong digit on paperwork. It was a VIN that tied back to a car that technically did not exist. The car had been showcased as a rare Mustang build, painted a bright metallic blue, driven to car shows where crowds gather for photos, and posted on social media with captions celebrating a six-figure flip. Fans remembered seeing Richard behind the wheel, revving the engine, smiling for the camera, promising this was a car that would break auction records. Behind the scenes, the IRS began connecting with the Department of Transportation and state vehicle departments to cross-check Richard's transactions. The deeper they looked, the more they noticed inconsistencies, with sales records and restoration claims that did not align. Cars that should have required emissions tests and registration fees were missing those records, and parts expenses filed under business deductions showed up without receipts matching the builds featured on his channels. One of the clips from Rawlings' own YouTube uploads, taken from a casual shop tour, showed that Mustang sitting under bright shop lights, polished and pristine. In the background, Richard laughed with his crew, calling out the next project as they panned over engine parts. However, when investigators paused the footage and checked a visible VIN plate in the frame, it did not align with any known restoration paperwork filed with Texas records. What they found next would shock even seasoned investigators. A deeper dive suggested that the car was built from a salvaged shell. Still, the paperwork was filed under a different title, bypassing fees and avoiding the inspections that a legitimate high-value build would have required. This Mustang, once a star in Richard's social media empire, became the thread that began to unravel everything. The IRS quietly launched a federal investigation into possible tax fraud, focusing on business deductions filed under Gas Monkey holdings, merchandise sales connected to the show, and income from international appearances that might have skipped proper reporting. A trail of money tied to overseas auctions and private collectors who purchased restored cars raised more questions about whether customs and export declarations had been filed correctly. For years, Rawlings had publicly claimed he flipped hundreds of vehicles annually, but the audit revealed gaps, with some transactions missing the paperwork that federal law requires. Behind closed doors, a team of investigators pieced together every sale, every transfer, and every social media post that showed a car with a clear plate or VIN tag. They pulled clips from YouTube videos, Fast and Loud episodes, and even Instagram reels, cross-referencing timestamps with invoices Richard's businesses submitted to the IRS. What started as a simple review of tax filings became a full-scale federal investigation, with agents visiting auctions, interviewing previous buyers, and checking records that Richard probably assumed would never see daylight. The man who made a name for himself turning rust into gold now faced a different reality, one where each detail mattered and every missing receipt turned into a potential charge. The king of cars, the guy fans trusted to deliver builds on camera while cracking jokes and lighting cigars, was under federal scrutiny. The Mustang with the fake VIN became the symbol of a system that had started to collapse from within. But what was hidden behind those locked doors that even Rawlings' closest allies never saw coming? What we are looking for is not in the videos online, but it was hidden in a space that Gas Monkey staff once called the cage. To most visitors, it looked like another part storage area in the back of the Dallas warehouse, stacked with old panels, crates of carburetors, and boxes labeled with handwritten tags. But behind a false wall, investigators found what they later described as a small industrial-grade forgery lab. The audit that started with a single fake VIN had led federal agents to this hidden room. They entered with a warrant on a humid morning, pushing past racks of dusty rims, stepping over broken floor tiles until they reached a heavy metal door. Inside, they found high-end laser etching equipment, blank VIN plates, and printers capable of producing registration stickers so convincing they could pass any casual inspection. On a scratched metal workbench were files containing original VIN information pulled from salvage yard purchases, along with ledgers noting which identities would be assigned to which builds. This wasn't just car restoration. It was identity theft on wheels. Cars with questionable histories, flood-damaged shells, or stolen frames were reborn inside that cage with new identities, rebranded as clean classics ready for auction. They could be passed off as rare finds, complete with documented, matching numbers that buyers trusted without a second thought. The operation was so systematic that federal agents later noted how some VINs had traveled through 3 or 4 states before arriving back in Texas under a fresh name, ready for a public sale with the Gas Monkey brand behind it. What made the discovery even more shocking were the witness testimonies from former employees who, for years, had stayed silent, believing that what happened in the cage was just shop business. One former technician shared how he was told to just grind off the old and let the new plates do the talking, believing it was part of normal restoration. Another mentioned seeing large cash payments exchanged after hours when private collectors picked up specific builds, with no formal paperwork ever filed. Footage from Richard Rawlings' own YouTube videos unintentionally captured glimpses of this secret operation. In one clip, Richard walked viewers through a late-night shop session, camera lights catching a corner of the locked door, as he joked about secret projects we can't show yet. At the time, viewers thought it was a tease for a new build, another Gas Monkey exclusive. However, investigators saw the same clip and recognized the reinforced hinges and keypad entry, markers they had already seen in shop photos submitted by whistleblowers. And it was not small scale. Reports later revealed that over 50 cars had passed through the system in a span of 2 years, with profits estimated in the millions. Cars restored on camera often had clean paperwork, but off-camera projects were filtered through this hidden system, allowing the operation to run in plain sight. The cage became the control room of a scheme that fed the brand's hunger for rare builds and big sales while creating a hidden revenue stream that was never taxed, never reported, and never questioned by buyers who trusted the Gas Monkey name. This is what brought federal prosecutors to the case. This is what turned Richard Rawlings, once the king of cars, into the subject of a criminal investigation that went far beyond a single Mustang with a fake VIN. The reputation built on fast deals and flash builds crumbled under the weight of evidence pulled from that small hidden room, where the myth of Gas Monkey collided with the reality of federal law. The scheme reached its peak with one devastating betrayal, when someone inside the shop turned on Rawlings and handed over the final piece of evidence that investigators needed to close in. It started when a European collector, a man who had spent years searching for an authentic Shelby GT500, believed he had found his dream car inside Gas Monkey garage. Richard Rawlings himself had walked him through the gleaming silver paint and carefully detailed engine bay, telling stories of American roads and the car's proud past. It was a handshake deal, a promise sealed with photo for Instagram, and the collector wired $1.2 million to secure what he thought was a piece of history. But what he bought was a ghost. The VIN was fake. The papers were forged, and the car's real past was buried under layers of polished metal and flashy marketing. When the collector tried to register in his country, customs flagged the documents, sparking a diplomatic phone call that would travel back across the Atlantic. It was this call that turned an international client into a whistleblower, handing over emails, receipts, and voice messages that reveal how trust had become a weapon in Rawlings' world, turning customers into victims. When trust becomes a weapon, no one is safe. And it was this betrayal that handed prosecutors a final key they needed to open every locked door around Richard Rawlings. The answer was hiding in plain sight, broadcast to millions every single week. Fast and Loud was not just a TV show, but the perfect marketing machine for Richard Rawlings. Each episode staged a hunt for rare muscle cars, the tension over last-minute deadlines, and the reveal of the roaring engines under shop lights. It all looked real, and that was the point. In one episode, Rawlings would show off a freshly restored Mustang, talking about authenticity and heritage as if the camera were a confessional. Meanwhile, behind those scenes, the VIN numbers on those frames were not always what they seemed, and the paperwork told stories that never happened on the road. Each episode became a sales pitch. Every dramatic barn find became a sales funnel, and fans who trusted Rawlings' screen presence were unknowingly stepping into a carefully crafted world where the lines between TV drama and actual transactions blurred. Every episode was evidence. Every find was fabricated, and the show itself became a shield that let Rawlings build trust with an audience that was eager to believe. And as the ratings climbed, So to the demand for the cars, he moved through Gas Monkey Garage, giving him the cover to run transactions that would later become central to his downfall. When the truth came out, the empire crumbled instantly. For over a decade, Richard Rawlings' Gas Monkey Garage had been a magnet for car culture, pulling in viewers with roaring engines and tight deadlines under hot shop lights. But in 72 hours, the empire he spent more than 10 years building was erased. It started with a single post in a classic car forum, a collector sharing receipts that didn't match a Shelby GT500's supposed history. The VIN tags, the restoration timelines, and even the documentation Richard held up to camera in old fast allowed episodes were suddenly under a microscope. By that afternoon, the forums turned into archives of episode timestamps and auction photos. Viewers rewatched segments, pausing frames to match chassis stamps and paperwork, comparing each one to public records that told a very different story. Industry insiders who once chased Gas Monkey collabs began pulling their deals. Auction houses flagged vehicles linked to the garage. Discovery, once the loudest cheerleader, removed banners from its streaming pages within 24 hours, followed by a brief statement distancing itself from Richard's activities and saying it was reviewing content strategy. Sponsors who aligned their brands with Richard's brash, Texas-style charisma started quietly removing logos from websites and pulling down social posts. And in the classic car market, prices on vehicles with Gas Monkey provenance dipped almost overnight. Collectors began calling each other, asking if they had paperwork, and if they had checked the hidden welds and hidden stamps on the frames. Some found hidden numbers that didn't match, realizing their prized investments were at risk of becoming worthless. Others discovered liens tied to cars they thought they owned outright. The market rippled as collectors scrambled to offload or confirm authenticity. Within 72 hours, years of empire building collapsed under the weight of receipts and paused video frames. It was as if the entire classic car world woke up, wiping the Instagram filters off what they thought they knew, realizing that the Empire Gas Monkey Garage had been built not just on high-octane edits and smoky burnouts, but on a foundation cracking under the most straightforward truth. People were finally asking questions. And the worst part for Richard? Every frame of Fast and Loud that once built his legend was now being used to dismantle it. When the dust settled, Richard Rawlings' case was more than a downfall. It was a mirror for an industry built on shiny chrome and hidden cracks, showing how easy it is to mistake loud confidence for honesty. The lesson? Trust, once sold for fame, can never be reclaimed, and the car world will feel that ripple for years. What other TV personalities might be hiding dark secrets?